sheet of paper, so now it's in our pews. So hold on to that till the storm passes by. Mark chapter number 4. Mark chapter number 4, and go on down to about verse number 35 there. And last week we covered verses 1 through 20, talking about the parable of the sower. If you remember, we talked about the sower. There was the seed that was on the wayside. That was a seed that Satan takes away immediately. There's no chance to grow. We talked about the seed that falls on the stony ground, where there's no roots, there's no depth there. Talked about the ground that's the thorny ground, and those are carnal Christians. It doesn't grow well because of all the stuff in the way, all the thorns, no spiritual growth. And then we talked about the good ground, and those are those that hear it and they receive it, and they produce it. Verses 21 through 25, you'll find the parable of the candlestick, and the application there is that light is not made to be hidden. And like the song that we used to sing in Sunday school about hiding your light under a bushel. And as believers, we ought to be out and about doing Father's business. We ought to be handing out tracts. We ought to be witnessing. There's some things that we ought to be doing, not hiding the light. We ought to be a witness and a testimony. 26 through 29, we see the parable of the seed and its growth. 30 through 33, we see the parable of the mustard seed. And then you come to verse number 34, and it says, "But without a parable spake he not unto them, and when they were alone, he expounded all things to his disciples." And we talked a little bit about that last week in verse number 10, I believe it was. Very similar to that. And again, the application there remains the same, that there's going to be some things that you learn when you get alone with Christ. You have to get alone with Christ to learn these things. So the disciples hear these parables, and they get along with Christ, and he expounds them even more. I can suggest to you, I can't make you do it, but I would suggest that when you go home on a Sunday night to cover the things that were preached today, that were preached every Sunday. Write down some of the verses that were quoted, and hey, the preacher preached on Exodus chapter 1. Well, Monday afternoon, when you've got a couple minutes, turn to Exodus chapter 1 and expound on those things, just you and the Lord. And he'll show you things that you wouldn't otherwise get. But here we come to verse number 35, and we'll read all the way down to the end of the chapter. And verse number 35 says, "And the same day, when the even was come, he saith unto them, Let us pass over unto the other side. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of the wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him, and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose, and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Let's have a word of prayer. Father, I thank you for the night, Lord. I thank you so much for the opportunity to preach here this evening. I pray that you just give me the right words to say. Father, I pray you help the people here tonight. God, if there's anybody here who is going through a storm in their life, God, I pray that you comfort them in every way that you know how. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. So several things I want to mention about this storm here. And first of all, storms are a part of life. And everybody goes through storms. I don't care if you're rich. I don't care if you're poor. I don't care what background you have. Everybody goes through storms. And when it rains on the just and it rains on the unjust. It is a part of life. Oftentimes, when storms come through, they leave damage. Sometimes they leave permanent damage. There's people that have gone through storms of life and they don't come out quite the same. The damage is permanent and there's ruin, and sometimes there's even death. But tonight, five things about this storm. Number one, this storm was sudden. It says in verse number 35, and the same day. And the same day. The same day is what? The same day as when Jesus was given parables. The same day as he was teaching on the sea. If you remember, he was on the ship, and the people were on the seashore, and he was teaching from the ship, and he was talking to his disciples alone in private. The same day. That's the same day. That's a sudden thing. And you better be careful the kind of things that that you boast about. Well, everything is fine. Well, my marriage is really good. My marriage is strong, and we got a full bank account, and we have good health, and we just got a clean bill of health. Well, isn't it amazing how quickly things can change? I mean, you are one phone call away from a storm in your life. Things can instantly change like that. Revelation chapter 18, and quickly turn there real quick. And if you look down in verse number 7, and when you talk about how quickly things can change, how quickly a storm can arise, how sometimes we get so overconfident with how we handle ourselves, and because I've been at my job for 20 years, there's no way they could let me go. I'm going to be there forever. They're going to keep on promoting. Well, let's see what the Bible says. Verse number 7: How much hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore her plague shall come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall wail with her, and lament for her, when she shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off, for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour thy judgment is come. Now, I know that's sort of a strange comparison to make here for a storm, and then you have judgment, but notice the fact that in 1 hour judgment has come. Now, I'm not saying a storm is judgment. I'm saying that's how quickly things can change. Sometimes when I look at Revelation chapter 18, I think of America. And when you read Revelation 18, it does make you scratch your head and you think, my goodness, I wonder if that actually is America. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there. But when you think about the beginning of our year and how quickly things changed, nobody would have thought that we would be dealing with what we're dealing with back in January, but how quickly things changed. But the same thing goes for a storm in one's life, is that it can change very, very quickly. If you talk to anybody who is a fisherman, I'm not talking about a fisherman who fishes up at Hines Park. I'm talking about a professional fisherman, one who goes out on the waters, and they'll tell you that when storms arise on the ocean, they come up like that. And sometimes they come up when it's a perfectly sunny day. Hey, the weather's great. I mean, in the forecast, there's supposed to be no rain. It's clear. And they're out there in the middle of the ocean, or at least 5-10 miles from shore, and a storm can come up like that, just like that. And that, a lot of people have lost their life and have had shipwreck, and it wasn't because they were careless in their planning. It was because the storm arose quickly. And storms of life do the same thing. They will come out of nowhere. They'll leave you no time to prepare, causing you to use what you have almost on the spot. Not in a storm tonight, I would be thankful and enjoy the peace that you have. So number one, it was sudden. Number two, notice that in this storm, or before this storm, these disciples were living right. They had just spent the day hearing Jesus teach, and now they went and spent some time alone with him to expound or to have him expound on what he taught. So they're right with God. I mean, they are walking with God, and now they're in a storm. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, again, being in the center of God's will is the safest place that a believer can be. But it does not exclude you from storms. It does not exclude you from having danger happen to you. We are not immune to disease. We are not immune we're not immune to deception. I'm going to say that again. We are not immune to deception. People think that, well, I'm King James only, rightly dividing Bible believer. Well, you can still be deceived like anybody else. And we see people deceived because they might get it good over here, but over here it goes right over their head. It goes right over their head and they miss the whole thing. I just read a book by Brother Peacock called The Man, the Message, and the Ministry. Really good book. But one of the things he mentions is that a lot of young preachers have the wrong spirit when they preach. They have the right attitude, they have the right position, they have a lot of things right, but they preach in the wrong spirit. And he pointed to street preachers a lot. And he said a lot of times you go out the street and you're just there to make people mad. You think that if I just rile them up, I'm doing the right thing. How angry they got. I'm doing my job. No, you're being a jerk. You're just, look, you might have the right stance. You might have the right idea. You might have the right heart, but you've got the wrong spirit. So what I'm saying is this: we're not immune to deception. We're not immune from storms just because we're living right. You say, well, I go to church, and well, I sing in my church, and I even preach in my church, and I voted for Trump. I did all these things. Why would God put me through a storm? My neighbor supports Antifa, and he's careless, and yet he's an atheist, and he's not going through a storm. We kind of think like that. I've thought like that. Yeah, I remember one time we broke down on a Sunday morning. My first thought was, no one else in my neighborhood's going to church. Look at their running cars. In fact, not only are their cars running, but their cars are all new. I'm driving a car that's 15 years old. They got cars that are 2 or 3 years old. Probably in debt up to their ears, nonetheless. That's what mine goes to. You know that when Jonah went through the storm, he was running from God, and the disciples were serving him. They both went through storms for different reasons, but just because one is living right, just because you're going to church, just because you're serving God, does not mean that you're not going to go through a storm. Doesn't mean that something can't happen. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter number 11. 2 Corinthians 11. And look down in verse number 24. 2 Corinthians 11 and verse number 24. And this is the Apostle Paul talking here. And he says, of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day have I been in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils amongst false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watching often, in hunger, and in thirst, and fastings often, in cold and in nakedness. Besides those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. So here you have the Apostle Paul, and here's someone who's living right. Here's someone who's in the center of God's will. And look at his resume. Well, you think you have it hard tonight? Oh, my toe hurts. Oh, I can't come to church. And then you got the Apostle Paul, shipwrecked 3 times, beaten, and we don't even see the details of the other things. My goodness, talk about a storm. By the way, there's God's got a wonderful plan for your life and the abundant life. You got to be careful how you spread the gospel. Be careful when you tell someone that God's got a wonderful plan. Their idea of a wonderful plan and God's idea of a wonderful plan are 2 different things. But there you have it. Living right. It was sudden. They were living right. Notice as well that number 3, that this storm was great. This was a great storm. It's described as great back in verse number 37. It says, and there arose a great storm. And this was not one of those storms that was 2.5 inches of snow, and we're going to shut down the state for a whole day. Isn't it funny that snowstorms today get media coverage of second to Corona? I'm not joking. If they say it's going to snow on Tuesday night, on Monday afternoon, they'll be like, we are live out here at I-75 and 9 Mile on the overpass. We look up in the sky right now, we don't see any snowflakes yet, but forecasters are predicting the snow is going to start at about 9 o'clock tonight. We're only 5 hours away from the snow. Make sure that you have blankets, scrapers, snow boots, a polar bear. All these things, and they give you the list of things that you need, and make sure you have this, and you're thinking, it's going to snow 2.5 inches. And by the time you wake up, it's probably going to be plowed. It's probably going to be melted already. But you know what you have? You have a bunch of people walking around, oh my goodness, it's going to snow. I got to get the bread and milk. They're gonna run around going crazy thinking they need to do something that they don't need to do. But this was a great storm. This was a great storm. And you have the Bible was talking about the wind and the waves, and it said the waves were coming in and the ship was full. So I mean the water's coming in and coming in and coming in and coming in. And it's full. I mean, you realize how much of a panic you would be in if you're going through this great storm and you look down and the water's in the boat. The water's not supposed to be in the boat. I mean, that's a great storm. Now, there's no let up and it's nonstop. And I said all that to say that sometimes the storms of life seem like there is no let up to it. It's nonstop. One thing after another, one thing after another. I mean, when you think about the phone call you get that, yeah, so-and-so is sick. And there's that, oh my, this is going to be hard. Well, you first hear about the sickness, then you hear about the suffering. And through the suffering, then there's a financial burden. Well, because after all, if somebody gets sick, there's a financial burden that's there. Because insurance isn't free for most people, unless you don't have a job or something. But if you do have a job, then you're paying for insurance. And you're paying for, you're paying for all sorts of things. So now you got a financial burden, and the financial burden leads to marriage problems, and then there's finally a death after the whole thing, and then there's guilt. The storm, it just keeps on raging, and it rages, and it rages, and it rages. It was a great storm. Maybe some of you here tonight have been through a great storm. I'm sure all of you at some point have been through a great storm. And you know, when you get that phone call, when you hear the news of cancer, or you hear something of a horrible sickness, it's a storm. I mean, that's a storm. And the suffering that's involved, and if you lose a loved one, my goodness, that's a storm. That's hard to recover from. There's people that I know, there's a person that I know that they their father killed themselves, and he killed themselves because he was caught doing something he shouldn't have been doing. That child's never recovered. Never recovered. That's a storm that left some damage, left permanent damage. And storms will leave damage. Divorces leave damage. And if you've been through a divorce, you know that it's a storm. It's a raging storm. If you've been cheated on, it's a raging storm. If you've lost your reputation, it's a raging storm. You lose a job, it's a storm. You know how hard it is? You know, you kids don't understand this yet, but someday when you become adults and you have your own job and you have your own mortgage and your own car, it's not easy to pay bills. You've got to learn to know what to buy, what not to buy. But if you lose your job, all of a sudden, now what do I do? Because GM doesn't care that you lost your job. They want their money. The financing company for your home they don't care that you lost your job. They want their money. That's a storm. That's a storm. And on we go. You lose your home, that's a storm. And this is a great storm that was going on. Some of you have been through a great storm. Notice as well that this storm, number 4, caused the disciples to doubt. Caused the disciples to doubt. Look at verse number 40. And Jesus said unto them, He said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? So the disciples are doubting here. I mean, here you have all this water coming onto the boat. They're wondering if they're going to make it through the night. And what's Jesus doing? He's taking a nap. Master, carest thou not that we perish? Why are you sleeping right now? My goodness. You know, there's some people that can sleep through anything. You know, I remember years ago trying to wake up Robert Bratcher one morning. I mean, it was like, get a baseball bat. Bam! Is he dead? He ain't waking up. Just everything, man. It was hard to wake that kid. I think he knew. He just didn't want to get up. I understand now. But then I was like, man, he's either playing this really good or I don't know. But this storm caused the disciples to doubt. If you look at verse number 35, what does Jesus say? He said at the end of that verse, let us pass over unto the other side. Let us pass over unto the other side. It was Jesus' plan to pass over on the other side. If Jesus is going to tell you, hey, let us pass over on the other side, guess what that means? You're going to get there, right? If he says, let us pass over to the other side, we're getting to the other side, whether you think you are or not. Here they are doubting God's direction. Turn to Exodus chapter number 14. Exodus chapter number 14. And here's an example of doubting God's direction. And you know, again, how often do we look at the children of Israel and we shake our heads, but you look a little bit closer and you're like, oh, man, sounds like me. Look down at verse number 10. Verse number 10. And here the children of Israel are coming up, or they're at the Red Sea. And so they have just left their area of bondage. And it says, and when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? So you think about the children of Israel just for a minute, and you have Moses coming to get them out of their bondage, and they saw all these miracles, they saw the mighty hand of God, they saw these things done, and yet you would think that they are just full of faith and they're full of power, and they're just gonna. You would think after you saw all that stuff that you could just swim across the Red Sea without it even being parted. But they get to the Red Sea and they look, and here come the Egyptians, and they say, "Oh, Moses, you're just going to bring us out here and let us die?" That's what they're thinking. You know what they're doing? They're doubting God's direction. They're not in a tropical storm. They're just up against a Red Sea, and they got their backs to the wall. You see, we have a tendency to trust in God until we come to a dead end. Well, I trust God. I believe God. Then we hit a dead end. Well, why would God let that happen? Why would God just let me die out here in the wilderness? Joshua chapter number 7. We preached on this maybe earlier this year when we went to the book of Joshua. But if you remember in Joshua chapter number 7, or in chapter number 6, you had Achan and with the battle of Ai. Remember when he took what he shouldn't have taken, and he committed trespass. He took the accursed thing, and then Israel loses the battle. And Joshua was wondering why Israel has lost this battle. And in verse 7 of chapter 7, and Joshua said, look at verse number 6, and Joshua rent his clothes and fell to the earth upon his face before the ark of the Lord until the eventide. And the elders of Israel put dust upon their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, wherefore hast thou at all brought this people over Jordan to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? Would to God that we had been content and dwelt on the other side of Jordan. So here you have the great Joshua. The great Joshua who brought the children of Israel over Jordan. And here he is having his first defeat. And oh God, did you just bring us over here so we can die at the hand of our enemies? He's kind of throwing himself a pity party. Why would God bring them over Jordan, part Jordan, so they could go across on dry ground, so that he could just kill them on the other side? You ever act like that? Oh Lord, why would you let this happen? Why would you save me just so you could bring me over here and let me die? Well, sometimes when you go through storms, you know what you do? You doubt God's goodness. You doubt God's direction. You start doubting things. That's what the disciples did. They were doubting. Doubting Thomas in the middle of that. But oftentimes we do that. And here you have the disciples in this ship doubting God's goodness. Master, carest thou not that we perish? Carest thou not that we perish? And when you're in the middle of a storm, and when the storm is raging and you're not getting the answers that you want, you know what it feels like? It feels like he doesn't care. If I was to ask everybody here tonight, have you ever felt like Jesus doesn't care? You know what you'd all say? Yep. I felt that way at least once, maybe twice, maybe a lot more times than that. Feels like he doesn't care. There's a whole song written, Does Jesus Care? Because sometimes you wonder. Sometimes you wonder because we want those answers right now. Lord, it's about to rain. We need it to stop. And then it just keeps on raining. The storm just keeps on raging. Why didn't the Lord allow this to happen? Why did he allow this to happen? Why did so-and-so die? Why did he let Lazarus die? 1 Peter 5:7 says, Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. He careth for you. Maybe that's what you need to hear tonight. Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. But it caused the disciples to doubt. And the last point tonight is the disciples gained experience. So number 1, it was sudden. Number 2, they were living right. Number 3, it was great. Number 4, it caused them to doubt. And number 5, it gave them experience. And young people, you may not understand experience at this point, but the older you get as a Christian, the longer you serve God, the more experience that you get. Sometimes you gain experience through things that you would prefer not to gain experience through, but that's just the case. If you've served God a long time, you've got experience. You've got experience of things that the Lord has brought you through. Again, I used King David as an example. And when David fought Goliath, to him that was the biggest battle that he ever fought at that time. But it turns out that was one of the smallest battles that he ever fought. But you know what that did? That gave him experience. That gave him experience for the next one, and the next one, and the next one, because you're going to need that experience. One of the things, I don't know why I do this, because I feel like I'm just preaching to myself, but here I go with the sports analogy. But one thing they talk about in hockey that is completely intangible is the idea of playoff experience. They like to have guys who've been there and done that before. Well, this team's got talent, but this team, they've got the experience. Even though this team might be more talented, they've got better players, they've got a better roster. This team has experience, and usually experience wins out. Because when you have experience, you play a little bit smarter, and you understand things, and you don't get as upset. That a lot of times that young talent, a lot of times what happens is that even though they have the talent and they have all the right tools, they get upset really easy. They lose it. You see them taking a lot of penalties. You see them doing things that the people with experience wouldn't so much do. And the same characteristics can be said for people within a church. You see people that have been saved for 20, 30 years, and they're calm. They have a calmer demeanor. You know why? They've been through storms. They've been through storms before that say, this is nothing. You should have seen the storm I went through back in, such and such, or I've been through this, or I've been through that. But understand this, that some people only learn through experience. Some things you only learn through experience. And do you know that experience will use you or will allow you to help others? Through your experience. When you go through something, you'll be able to help other people going through the same thing. Now, nobody here would like to say, ooh, I hope I get a horrible disease someday. That way I can help somebody else with a horrible disease. That's not something we want to sign up for, but it's something that you go through and you say, you know what? Now I've got that experience. Now I can say, I do know how you feel. Because there's a lot of people here that I can't tell you, hey man, I know how you feel, because I don't know how you feel. And maybe there's experiences that I've had where I can say that, but for the most part, no. That's just the truth. Experience will allow you to help others through your experience. Some of you have had cancer before. I can't tell you that, I know what you're going through. I don't know what you're going through. Some of you do. Some of you can help each other out and say, you know what? I was diagnosed with cancer too. I know what you're going through. There's somebody I work with who his son was diagnosed with cancer about 10 years ago. And they went through a horrible cancer battle, and he ended up living. But now he has started a nonprofit organization helping out families going through cancer. And as weird as it may sound to us, he collects old video game equipment and he drops it off at hospitals, because children at children's hospitals don't get visited all the time. A lot of times, families that have children that have cancer can't be there all the time because they work for a living, they have jobs. So little Billy is in the hospital from Monday, or he's there all week, and mommy and daddy come on the weekends because that's the only time they can make it. So you know what they do? Hardly nothing. They walk around bored, sick, don't know what to do. But through his experience, now he's helping other people, and they're able to drop these things off. Now, I'm not one who sit there and endorse video games. It's not my cup of tea. But you know what? I'm glad that he's taken that experience and helping other people. And we ought to do the same thing. If you've been through a horrible storm, why don't you help someone else who's going through a storm as well? Jack Patterson has always said, don't let your hurt somebody else. Why don't you let your hurt help somebody else? We've all been hurt. We've all been hurt. There's not anybody here who can say, you know what, I've never had any hurt done to me. Of course you have. Of course you have. If some of you have been through a horrible divorce, help someone else who's going through one. If any of you have lost your job and been in financial ruin, help somebody else out. Sit down and talk to them and say, hey, you know what, we went through the same thing, but you know what, we got through the storm. We said the same thing. We said, Master, carest thou not that thou perish? I mean, we were thinking the same thing. We understand what you're going through. Maybe some of you have lost a loved one before, and you see someone else going through a loss. Help them out. And on and on. I can use example after example after example after example. But experience. The disciples gained experience. And when you think about experience, the experience that the disciples had by being in this storm not only gave them that experience and gave them some things that they now knew how to handle, but it also gave them understanding as well. And if you look in chapter 5 of our text of Mark, go back there myself, Mark chapter 5, verse 1, and it says, and they came over the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. So when you look at verse number 1 of that text, it's a continuation of the story that we're in right now. And they get to the other side, into the country of the Gadarenes, and what you have here is you have the story of the maniac of Gadara. And you remember him? He was the one who was cutting himself with the stones, and he was running through the tombs. Do you realize that Jesus took his disciples through a storm to get to another man? I mean, think about the application there. That when they were going through the storm, oh, Master, carest thou not that we perish? Why is Jesus sleeping over there? You know what he was doing? He was going to the other side to get to another man. Think about that. Maybe the storm that you're going through, or the storm that you've been through, wasn't for you. Maybe it was for somebody else. I mean, I go back to the nonprofit organization that my friend started. Maybe that storm wasn't for him. Maybe it was for all the other kids who are being helped. And he doesn't just drop off video game stuff. They go and they visit the kids too. And a lot of times he'll come into work and sit down and just kind of shake his head and be like, one of the kids that we've been helping out for the last 6 months died last night. That's heartbreaking. And he's able to talk to the parent and say, boy, you know, we were in the same boat that you were. We were dealing with the same things. And he's got a whole bunch of things. He tells them what to do and what not to do. Number one, don't Google anything. Don't Google what they have. Don't listen to what the internet says about disease and different things. Which I should say this. Don't listen to what the internet says about anything. Anything. I mean, the internet is full of lies. Full of lies. I saw something the other day that had a picture of Abraham Lincoln holding an iPhone, and it said, don't tell me this photo was not Photoshopped. They didn't have Photoshop back when Abraham Lincoln was alive. That's where we're at, people. That is where we are at. But understand that they went through this storm. Jesus took his disciples through the storm to get to another man. And by the way, this man that they got to, the maniac of Gadara, we'll talk about him next week, but he was not a man that any of us would have went through a storm for. I mean, this man was living in the tombs. This man was cutting himself. This man was a maniac. That's why he's known as the maniac of Gadara. No, none of us would say, oh, I'll go through a storm for him. I'll go through a horrible period of my life. Of course not. But you know what? Jesus doesn't think like we do. He doesn't think like we do at all. So maybe what you're going through tonight isn't for you. Maybe it's for someone else. And you know what? You might not understand until you get to the other side. There is plenty of stuff that we are not going to understand until we get to heaven. Why did so-and-so suffer? Isn't it hard to see people suffer? Hard to see, it's hard to see children suffer. It's hard to see children go through cancer. It's hard to see good people go through horrible things. We sit there and we scratch our head and we don't understand. We don't understand the people involved and how they can get through it. The Lord knows what He's doing. And someday we'll have a whole lot more understanding. So number one, it was sudden. Number two, they were living right. They still went through it. Number three, it was great. And number four, it caused them to doubt. And last, it gave them experience. I'm going to go ahead and close the service reading a passage of Scripture, Psalms chapter number 46. Psalms chapter number 46. And I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. And I don't know, I mean, a lot of times people don't wear their emotions on their sleeve, and we don't know what a lot of people go through, but if you're going through a storm tonight, I hope this helps. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. Selah. Well, that's good stuff, ain't it? That's good stuff. And when you're going through a storm, and you say, well, I'm not going through a storm, everything is fine. Well, that's good, because eventually you will. And remember that. Remember Psalms 46, 1 through 3. And remember that when you do go through a storm, you're gonna need that experience. And I hope that when you see someone else going through a storm, you'll take what you've learned from your storm and show them how to get through it and help them. Let's go ahead and close in a few verses of invitation. We're going to sing page, let's see, Have Thine Own Way, Lord, 366. And you can stand to your feet. Page 366, Have Thine Own Way, Lord.